That Thanksgiving night, I kicked the door open into the lit house, where 12 people were laughing with friends, as if they were living inside a perfect family portrait, except for the single detail they had deliberately cropped out. My 7-year-old grandson sitting on the snowy steps, lips purple like an old bruise, hands shaking so hard he couldn't hold the glove I kept trying to push onto him. I scooped the boy up and said, furious, "I'm giving you 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson, right now." Then Damien, at the head of the table, raised his glass of red wine, his voice calm. He burned the turkey. Being out there is where he belongs. And what chilled me more than the Vermont wind was the way the people around him chimed in and cheered like it was the obvious thing to do, as if leaving the child out in the cold was what he deserved. If you've ever watched the weakest one turned into a sacrifice just to keep a family picture looking pretty, stay and follow me. One person standing up at the right moment can change the fate of an entire family. If this story touches you, leave a single and tell me where you're listening from. And if you want to follow stories like this, I'm grateful for your subscription. Vermont snow falls in its own way, not in a rush, but slow and thick, clinging to every branch, every roof, making the whole road from Burlington to Montpelier tonight look like an endless white cloth stretched out before the nose of my old Ford F-150. I, Ronan Hale, sat behind the wheel, hands tight, back hunched forward as I watched the road through the blizzard, while the weight of missing Lila and worrying about my daughter Sienna and my grandson Amos pressed hard on my chest. The radio played low, a classic rock station my wife and I used to listen to when we drove through the damp, cold New England towns, now just old music and an empty passenger seat. The wooden surveyor's toolbox rested beside me, the cracked ruler, the measuring tape from when I first started, the compass I always handed Amos to fiddle with whenever he came along. The phone screen on the dash suddenly lit up, buzzing softly under the wind. "Mr. Ronan," I saw in front of Sienna's house. A short message from a neighbor, but as cold as the wind pounding the glass. I didn't open it yet, the road slick as grease, hazard lights from other cars blinking orange-red like a swarm of lost fireflies. When the road straightened and no car trailed me, I opened the message. "Mr. Ronan, I saw in front of Sienna's house, little Amos standing outside the door since I left for the market, and he was still there when I returned. I didn't dare interfere, but I'm worried." The word again drove into my chest like a nail. Lila once said, "If you can see what's about to break, then don't let our child's sadness go unnoticed." I set the phone down, but my mind had already left the lane of I-89, returning to this past summer when Amos followed me to survey a house in Winooski. A 7-year-old boy, awkward but sturdy, with deep black eyes, just like his mother's when she was little, crouched beside me in the dusty attic, asking question after question. "Grandpa, how do you look at that strip of wood and know it's sinking? How do you know this door frame was once water damaged?" He asked nonstop, eyes wide with curiosity, his voice small but eager like he was afraid to miss something important. And in that moment, in that dusty attic, I felt my heart soften. The boy standing next to me, skinny, clumsy, but with eyes so bright and sincere, they made decades of my work suddenly feel meaningful because there was still one child in the family who wanted to listen to me, believe what I knew, treat me like the keeper of some old world secrets he was trying to understand. And it was that innocence, that focus, the way he tilted his head waiting for me to explain, that made me feel useful, needed, warmed straight to the bone in a way I rarely dared admit. That very day, when he pulled up his sleeve to show me a board eaten by termites, a long purple bruise appeared, narrow and exactly where an adult's 4 fingers would have squeezed hard. Years of experience in the trade told me that wasn't a fall bruise, wasn't an accidental bump, but the mark of deliberate force. I asked gently, "What happened to your arm, Amos?" He pulled it back fast, answering smoothly as if rehearsed. I hit the shelf in the garage. Sienna appeared in the doorway with a strained smile. "He's clumsy, Dad. Don't worry." Damien leaned against the kitchen frame, beer can in hand, lip curling. Kids these days are soft. A bruise isn't going to kill anyone. I wasn't a cop or a social worker, but in that moment, I knew something was wrong in the way Amos lowered his head, the way he took blame instantly, the way Sienna avoided my eyes, and the contempt in Damien's tone. I should have pushed further, but I convinced myself that maybe nothing's wrong. And now the message I saw in front of Sienna's house was the crack I'd always feared. The phone buzzed again, this time an email. Draft contract. Maplewood Victorian Project. 280,000 USD. A new contract worth $280,000. Enough for a 63-year-old man like me to live comfortably for another decade. Damien didn't know the exact number, but he knew I didn't live on a pension. The time he visited my house in Burlington, he walked a loop, hand brushing the stair rail, eyes scanning every door frame, then half joking, half serious. "A house this nice, you could refinance or let us use it as collateral. We'd get a ton of capital. We can help you with the paperwork." Sienna stood beside him then, eyes full of trust. "Damien knows finance, Dad. Don't be stubborn." I only smiled thinly, bearing my irritation in my voice. The house that had survived hundreds of winters wasn't something to pawn for a son-in-law who liked flipping money. But I'd already slipped when he asked, "A job like that runs how much, Dad?" And I answered, $250 to $300. I didn't miss the glint in his eyes, the look of someone who saw only numbers, not a house. The wind outside howled harder, snow stacking thick on the wipers, Montpellier appearing in the distance like a smear of orange light under a low ceiling of clouds. I turned into Maple Crest Lane, where pastel-painted two-story houses sat still in the snow, a few roofs already hung with Christmas lights. Sienna's house is near the end of the street, pale blue with white trim, a red-bowed wreath on the door, the porch light throwing warm gold across the freshly shoveled snow. Damien's SUV parked sideways by the garage, Sienna's car tight against the curb. Thin smoke drifted from the chimney and dissolved into the snowfall. Through the glass, warm yellow light and soft holiday music created the scene of a family that looked fine. Dinner, laughter, curated peace. I shut off the truck, the old engine going silent, leaving a thick quiet in which I could hear my own heartbeat. The wind still wailed, the snow still fell, but the cold running down my spine came not from the weather, but from the truth that a house could look perfect on the outside, while something inside had already gone wrong. I thought of Amos, the bruise, the eyes full of things he wanted to say but swallowed back. I thought of my hesitation, all because I didn't want to believe my daughter lived with a violent man. My hand gripped the truck's door handle, freezing, my heart colder still. I didn't know what I was about to hear or see tonight. I didn't know that everything I'd learned in my life would have to be used to face my own family. I only knew this. Inside was light, music, warmth. Outside was a snowstorm. And somewhere between the snow-covered steps and that wooden door, my grandson, whom I loved like my own child, was shaking from a cold not born of the sky. I inhaled deeply, opened the door, stepped into the snow, and had no idea that the moment I knocked on that pale blue door was the moment everything in our lives began to veer into a different path, as violent as the New England storm screaming outside. Crest Lane roared like a giant wind tunnel. Snow whipped my face raw, the damp pine and chimney smoke from other houses blending into a scent that should have felt peaceful. From where I'd parked, I looked through the fogged, breath-clouded glass and almost smiled, seeing the first-floor windows of my daughter's house glowing gold, silhouettes moving, someone lifting a tray, the deep red tablecloth, the crystal shine of wine glasses reflecting on the ceiling. A picture-perfect Thanksgiving, straight out of an illustrated book. Soft country music drifted out mingled with laughter and the clink of silverware on plates. The whole house was like a warm box set in a field of white, and right beneath that porch with the maple leaf wreath, the place that should have been dry, safe, was a shape curled up so tightly that if you weren't paying attention, you'd mistake it for discarded cardboard. I stepped out of the truck, the door shutting with a dry clack in the cold air. The wind slapped straight across my face, but something colder was already in front of me. Amos! The boy crouched on the cement step iced over in a thin glaze, back pressed to the door, arms wrapped around his ribs like he was holding on to the last scrap of warmth. He wore only a thin gray hoodie gone fuzzy with age, an old t-shirt visible underneath. His jeans were soaked and heavy at the cuffs, and his sneakers were torn enough that his toes nearly poked through. His face was pale, his lips bruised purple, his breath puffing out in small, trembling clouds. Behind the glass, I saw someone stand to pour wine, raise a glass. Laughter echoed again, clear enough that I caught a faint "Cheers!" Inside, they toasted. Outside, my grandson curled like a stray dog. I bent down, placing the hand that had spent decades gauging wood temperature and wall moisture against his forehead. The habit that years of surveying buildings and snowstorms had taught me. The difference between stunned cold and dangerous cold. His skin was frozen deep enough for his facial muscles to stiffen, but underneath there was still the dampness of anxious sweat. This wasn't the cold of a kid who played outside for 15 minutes, then ran in for hot cocoa. This was the cold of someone left out far too long and too afraid to knock. "Amos!" I called softly, not wanting to startle him. His eyes fluttered, taking several seconds to recognize me. "Grandpa!" His voice was hoarse, each word breaking apart as his teeth chattered uncontrollably. I tugged his hoodie zipper up, though I knew it would do nothing. "Why are you sitting out here? Why aren't you inside? It's warm in there." I shifted enough so he could see through the slit in the curtain. The table, the shadow of his mother ladling gravy for someone. He glanced at the door for the quickest second, then dropped his head immediately. I'm not allowed in the house," he whispered so quietly that if I weren't kneeling right there, I wouldn't have heard it. A 7-year-old doesn't say that out of stubbornness or pride. Kids that age, if upset, will bang doors, argue, and storm off. But this posture, sitting still, curled up on the step like he was serving a sentence, that was an adult's order, shoved into his mouth and repeated until he believed it. I didn't ask who said so, because I already knew the answer. I just didn't have the proof. I stripped off the heavy coat I wore and wrapped it around him, pulling the wool collar up over half his frozen face. With my other hand, I slid under his knees and back, lifting him from the step. He was so light, it sent a sharp line of pain up my spine, the kind of light that means a growing child whose weight hasn't kept up. When I turned, the dining room light caught us through the window. For a moment, the reflection on the glass looked like two parallel worlds. Inside, the white tablecloth, turkey, wine glasses, smiles. Outside, an old gray-haired man holding his grandson swaddled in a coat, snow clinging to his pant legs. No one inside stopped laughing long enough to look out. I opened the back door of the Ford, laid Amos on his side across the seat, and shook out the emergency kit I always carried when I had to overnight at mountain job sites. The reflective silver blanket snapped open with a dry crinkle, and I wrapped it tightly around him, switching on both the seat heater and the maxed-out cabin heat. The fan began to roar, warm air slowly filling the cramped space that smelled of old leather and wood dust. Under the pale interior light, I saw more clearly the details I'd missed earlier. The purpled crescents under his fingernails, the cracked skin on his hands, the red patches on his wrists like old marks not fully healed, the dried mud mixed with road salt on his shoe collars, proof he had walked back and forth to the same spot over and over, but hadn't dared go farther. One pant leg was frayed enough to show the white threads inside. Every detail said the same thing. This child wasn't just cold for one afternoon. He had been living cold for a long time. Amos tried to open his eyes, voice shaking. Grandpa, don't make a scene. If my stepdad finds out, I'll have to stay outside even longer. I heard the dry, terrified swallow in his throat. In my mind, the map of Maple Crest Lane, the police records of domestic disturbance at house number 14, and the yellow-brown bruises on his arm from this past summer stacked together like layers of a site diagram. Surveying old houses, I'd seen enough cracks, shifts, and water stains to know when a structure was about to fail. Surveying my own family, I realized this structure had failed long ago, and tonight, between a snowy step and a shivering child, I no longer had the right to pretend I didn't see it. I pulled the truck door shut, the heavy thud echoing, and turned to face the house blazing with light behind me. The laughter from inside still carried on, steady, warm, like a family movie playing on TV. Amos lay in the blanket, eyes half closed, lips still murmuring, "Grandpa, don't tell." I placed my hand on his shoulder and said, slow and clear, "Don't worry. Tonight, the one who should be shaking isn't you." In the sub-zero New England cold, between two worlds, separated by a single wall, I understood perfectly. From this moment on, I wasn't just a grandpa showing up for turkey. I was the only person standing between that boy and the house that kept calling itself family. I turned the cabin heat one more notch. Warm air began to spread, melting the patches of ice clinging to the truck's roof. Amos lay on his side beneath the blanket, his breathing slowly evening out, though his shoulders still jerked every time the wind slammed against the truck. The yellow glow from the house behind us stretched across the rearview mirror like a cruel reminder. Inside was warmth and laughter. Outside, my grandson nearly froze. "Can you tell Grandpa," I kept my voice low so he wouldn't feel pushed, "why you had to sit out in the cold?" Amos bit his lip. I saw his cheek twitch from the lingering shivers. After a few seconds, he whispered, "I burned the turkey skin." I tilted my head. "Burned it how bad?" He pointed, his small hand still purple with cold, showing just a slightly darkened patch at the corner of the turkey thigh. I pictured the scene in a heartbeat. A kid too young to be handling basting and turning a bird, fumbling in the kitchen, the faint smell of singe, Damien walking in, the shout, and a sentence handed down without trial. Amos took a deep breath, like the next line hurt worse than the cold. Damien said, "Let him chill, it builds character." Chill? In a grown man's mouth, it might sound like a joke, but matched with a child turning blue, it became a punishment without disguise. My hand tightened, heat rising in my gut. "And your mom?" Amos swallowed, lowering his head. "Mom told me to come inside, at first. But Damien said she spoils me, makes me soft, needs to teach me responsibility." He repeated it with the tone of someone who'd heard it 1,000 times. I knew that kind of gaslighting, had seen it in families when I surveyed homes after disputes. The guilty turning the victim into the culprit, blaming the one who can't fight back. And if heard long enough, Sienna, my daughter, had likely believed that twisted logic. When I pulled the blanket higher, my hand brushed the boy's wrist. He flinched hard, the reflex of someone used to pain. I immediately held his hand gently, careful not to frighten him. Under the dim interior light, I saw clearly a bruise shaped like 4 squeezing fingers, shading into the green-yellow of a wound several days old. "This?" I asked quietly. Amos yanked his hand back as if afraid of being scolded. It's nothing." I dropped a water bottle. He just grabbed my hand to pull me over. A normal child would say, someone grabbed me, pulled me, but that word, he, spoken like an enemy, not family, didn't come naturally. It came from fear. I didn't pull up his sleeves, didn't examine him like a cop, just observed enough to know these injuries weren't accidents, and they weren't the first. "Amos," I said, not sharp, not raised, just steady enough for him to feel I stood on his side. A home is not a place meant to scare people, and my grandson is not something someone gets to toss around. His face twisted, not from cold, but from panic. Grandpa, don't, please. Why, please? Because every time someone argues with him, he punishes me. Last time I spilled a glass of water, Mom argued. He made me sleep in the garage. Garage. In Vermont, a garage is a walk-in freezer in winter. I closed my eyes for half a second. 7 years since my wife died, I thought the worst pain a person could feel was losing a partner. I was wrong. The worst pain is seeing your family suffer something you should have protected them from. When I opened my eyes, I stared at the bright house in the mirror, a perfect-looking nest with rot in its walls. Amos, I said slowly, you don't worry. Tonight, the only one who should be afraid isn't you. He looked at me, not fully understanding, but I saw, for the first time since I lifted him off that frozen step, a faint spark of hope. And for me, that was enough to start a war. I lifted Amos from the truck, wrapped the blanket tight around him, and walked straight toward the front door of the house my daughter once called home. Warm yellow light spilled through the crack, the scent of turkey drifting out. But what I smelled most was betrayal. My hand tightened on the doorknob. Locked, of course. I drew a breath and used the same force a lifetime of repair work had built into me. One hard shove. The door flew open and slammed the wall with a sharp crack that froze the packed dining room into silence. The people who'd been laughing all turned at once, staring as if I'd just desecrated a sacred ritual. The tablecloth was red, candles glowing, wine glasses full. And Damien rose at the head of the table, face cold as metal, hand still resting on the back of his chair as though he owned the entire world. I pulled Amos closer to my chest and said, voice ringing out, you have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson. Right now. But instead of shock, the room froze and cracked open with contempt. A man at the head of the table laughed. Who do you think you are? Some old man past his prime trying to play hero? A woman lifted her wineglass with theatrical grace. If he misbehaved, he deserved the cold. That's how they learn? A middle-aged couple shook their heads, the husband speaking loudly enough for all to hear. Damien did the right thing. A rude kid needs discipline. An older woman leaning near a candle added, voice sharp as needles. A child who doesn't listen should be left out longer. I looked around, 12 people, not one standing for the boy whose lips were turning blue in my arms. No discomfort, no guilt. They were united behind him like a rehearsed ritual. A man at the far end pulled out his phone to record, snickering, Jesus, the old man's trying to play savior. Damien looked at me, basking in the room's support like a smug king. He ruined Thanksgiving, he said slowly so everyone heard, so he stays out until he apologizes. A woman leaned toward her friend but made sure to speak loudly. See? Kids who act out need consequences. I looked at Sienna. My daughter sat beside him, face pale, hands clenched in her lap, silent as if her voice had been locked away. Sienna, I called. She didn't look at me, didn't move. The man beside her jerked his chin up, voice dripping with disdain. Don't bother your daughter. You're the one acting out tonight. I stepped farther in, nudged the door closed with my foot. Several people frowned as if I'd dirtied their floor. Explain, I said to Damien. Why does a child have to sit in the cold until his lips turn blue? Damien scoffed, but this time he didn't laugh alone. The entire table chuckled with him, small, sharp sounds like glass shards clicking together. Maybe you should stick to your little broken houses instead of parenting, he said. A man to the right immediately piled on. Yeah, you're good at fixing old wrecks. Leave the child raising to adults. A woman snorted. Some role model of a grandpa. Voices shot at me from every direction, a flock of giant birds pecking down. I felt the room's pulse. They weren't upset that Amos had been left outside. They were upset that I had walked in and broken the order Damien controlled. I placed my hand on Amos's shoulder. The boy trembled, but his fingers clutched me tighter, gripping the only safe place in a room full of people with stone-cold hearts. I scanned the room. Bright, warm, beautiful, yet filled with faces wearing the same mask of contempt. "All right," I said. My voice was low, but hard enough that a few people inhaled sharply. "I've heard enough." I looked directly at all 12 of them. "This child is leaving with me. Right now." A woman burst into laughter as if I'd told a joke. "You think you have that right?" A man growled. "You're not taking him anywhere." The guy at the far end spat out the line that sent the whole room laughing again. "If I were Damien, I'd leave him out there another hour." Not one person asked, "Was he cold?" Not one person looked at the boy. They looked only at me. They sided with the strongest wolf in the room. And in the space between candle crackles and Amos's trembling breaths, as he buried his face against my chest, as if trying to disappear from the world, I understood exactly what kind of room I was standing in. I lifted Amos from the truck, wrapped the blanket tightly around him, and walked straight toward the front door of the house my daughter once called home. Warm yellow light spilled out, the scent of turkey drifting gently. But what I smelled most was betrayal. My hand tightened on the knob, locked. Of course, I inhaled, used the force a lifetime of home repair had built into me. One hard thrust. The door burst open, smacking the wall with a sharp crack that silenced the crowded dining room. The people who'd been laughing turned all at once, staring as if I'd shattered their sacred ritual. The table draped in red, the candles glowing, wine glasses full. And Damien stepped forward at the bottom of the stairs as I turned, blocking the way like a door locked by his own arrogance. His shoulders squared, chin raised, eyes cutting like blows. "You take one more step, and I'm calling the cops for kidnapping. I swear." His voice was low, but stretched so tight the nearest guests held their breath, more afraid of him than opposed. Sienna stood behind him, clutching a napkin, eyes wide but empty, the look of someone gaslit so long she no longer knew right from wrong. "Sienna!" I called again, hoping she would wake and stand for her own child. But she only shook her head slightly, lips trembling, fingers twisting together. No courage, no words, no allegiance, not even to Amos. Damien sensed it and moved forward half a step, using his body to drive me back. "The kid stays. You're causing trouble in my house." I looked him straight in the eye. A collapsing house always shows cracks where no one looks. Humans carry theirs right in their gaze. My late wife once told me, when I lost patience with a client, "If you want to understand a person, read the structure in their eyes the way you read the beams of a house." Damien's eyes now, not authority. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing his victim. Fear of truth. I didn't answer him. I looked down at Amos, the boy still gripping my hand, fingers purple with cold, but holding on with surprising strength. "Go get your things," I told him, my voice low and steady in a way that surprised even me. I guided him up the stairs. Damien lifted a hand to stop us, but I stepped close, my shoulder brushing his chest, my eyes never moving away. 1 second. 2. He faltered, not by much, but enough for us to pass. We reached his room, a space that looked abandoned for months. Rumpled blankets, clothes scattered, no heater, the window not fully shut, so cold wind puffed the curtain. His schoolbooks lay on the desk, their covers bent, a few pages torn. One corner of the desk was cracked, as though someone had slammed it. This was not a love child's room. This was the room of someone merely allowed to exist. I helped Amos pack a few clothes. He moved fast, so scared his hands shook while pulling the zipper. Downstairs, Damien's voice grew louder. "You have no right. This is my house. You won't take it from me." The last part was strange. Take it? I touched Amos's back, signaling silence. When we came down, Damien stood at the bottom of the stairs like an animal cornered, shoulders heaving, face red, jaw clenched. You think you're some hero? All you do is destroy things, he yelled. Sienna clutched her sleeve, shrinking to the side, and finally, her eyes met mine with a silent plea. She didn't say it, but it was clear. Dad, take him. A neighbor's door opened with a soft click. Hearing the shouting, people stepped out to look. Snow fell white across the yard, lights blazing, voices raised, everything becoming evidence, witnesses. Damien realized it too. He froze, his face lost a shade. I placed my hand on Amos's back and let him past. Touch him again, I said softly, just loud enough for him and Sienna to hear. And I'll call Vermont state law tonight. Damien's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't move, didn't dare. Snow poured down as Amos and I stepped outside. The Ford's headlights shone across the yard, warm air fogging the truck's windows. I opened the door, set the bag in the back seat, then buckled Amos in. The boy looked at me as if he still couldn't believe he was actually being taken away. I closed the door. As my hand gripped the truck handle, I turned back to the house. Still warm, still bright, still full of voices. But to me, it was nothing more than an empty shell now. I climbed in and started the engine. The tires crunched over the thin layer of snow. Amos exhaled a long breath, gripping the edge of the coat I'd wrapped around him. I hadn't even started the engine to leave Maple Crest Lane when blue and red lights swept a cold streak across the thick snow. A Vermont State Police cruiser slid gently to the curb, headlights cutting straight through my windshield. They didn't arrive too fast. Turned out 2 neighbors had already called 911. They'd heard Damien screaming, seen me break the door, and especially seen a blue-lipped child carried out to a truck. In a quiet place like Montpelier, that alone puts the cops on high alert. The patrol SUV glided over the snow and stopped a few meters away. 2 officers stepped out, heavy jackets on, flashlights sweeping across me and Amos. Evening, sir. We received multiple calls about a disturbance and a welfare check involving a child. Damien burst out of the house, voice shrill with rage. He kidnapped my son! Kidnapped! Arrest him! I opened the truck door and stepped out, standing straight, keeping Amos behind me so he wouldn't panic. The 2 officers, one male, one female, approached. The male officer asked, Sir, is the child going with you voluntarily or under coercion? Before I could speak, Amos tugged on my coat. He was shaking, but his voice was clear. I want to go with my grandpa. Damien barked a loud laugh, trying to drown him out. He's manipulating him. This old man has issues, officers. I raised a hand, asking to speak. I had no photos, but I had something better. Truth witnessed by the entire street. In the patrol lights, I pointed to the house across the road. Mrs. Harriet Stillman stood there holding up her phone, and the porch camera of house number 14, directly facing us, had recorded the whole scene of Amos sitting on the snowy steps from nearly 11 o'clock that morning until I arrived. The wind whipping his face, his lips turning purple, his hands shaking. All of it documented with witnesses and timestamps more solid than any picture. The 2 officers exchanged a glance, the kind people in the job recognize. They had seen enough. The female officer asked, Ma'am, can you confirm the child was left outside in this weather? Sienna opened her mouth, but couldn't form a single word. She just looked at Amos, then at me, eyes lost like someone suddenly dropped into the center of a storm. Following Vermont Youth Welfare Protocol, the male officer stated, For the next 72 hours, the child will go with his grandfather. We will file a mandatory report to CPS tonight. Damien's face flushed red. This is insane. He's just an old man with a hammer. Don't pretend you're a hero. His voice was loud enough that several neighbors opened their doors. A man on his porch said, We heard everything. A camera across the street beeped as it kept recording. Perfect evidence for what was coming. I placed my hand on Amos's shoulder, gentle but firm enough for him to understand. Tonight, he was safe. The snow had stopped by the time I steered away from Maple Crest Lane, but the wind still blew cold currents through every seam of the truck. Amos sat quietly beside me, wrapped tightly in the emergency blanket I'd tucked around him. His eyes were half tired, half wary, the look of a child used to watching grown-ups for danger. But as the truck turned down the dirt road leading to my 120-year-old timber house, I saw his shoulders loosen just a little, as if the old wood and quiet of this place granted him a temporary pause from fear. The house emerged in the dark. Snow-covered pitched roof, the curved porch built in 1903, warm amber light glowing from the window, just the way Lila, my wife, always liked on winter evenings. I stopped the truck, shut it off, and let the silence settle for a moment. Amos looked out through the glass, his voice small but honest. "Your house looks like something in a fairy tale." I let out a soft laugh. "Well, it's old enough to become a story." I got out, snow crunching underfoot, then came around to lift him down. He still shook, but not from fear anymore, only from cold. I opened the porch door, and a gust of dry pinewood scent washed out, the smell Lila used to call the smell of safety. Inside, I reached for the wood stove. The logs caught, snapping and hissing, throwing firelight across the worn rug and warming the room within minutes. "Sit here," I said, pointing to the long sofa. Amos settled down, blankets still around him, eyes fixed on the fire like a small, shivering cat trying to reclaim its heartbeat. I went to the kitchen, turned on the gas stove, and set yesterday's pot of chicken soup to heat. Onions, celery, and soft chicken drifted through the air like a sedative made for people emerging from terrible days. When I brought the hot bowl out, Amos stared at it as if he couldn't believe it was for him. "Eat while it's warm." He blew on it, sipped once. His face eased, his throat swallowed slowly, and then I heard a long exhale, the sound of relief. "It's been so long since I got to eat something warm when I'm cold," he said, voice so real it went straight into my chest. I sat down in the chair beside the fire, watching the flames dance. "Lila, my wife, made this soup every winter," I said. "She used to get mad at Vermont weather. Soup was her way of fighting back against the cold." Amos smiled, the first real smile of the day, not a cautious one, not a forced one, a smile like a child allowed to breathe. "She must have been kind," he said. I looked at her photo on the wooden shelf, soft smile, silvering hair, and the ache and warmth hit at the same time. She was kind, but she never tolerated injustice. She told me all the time, "Always protect and love the children. Grown-ups answer for their choices." I looked at Amos. He was taking a second spoonful, cheeks flushed from the heat, eyes drifting toward Lila's photo. "You're doing what she said, right?" I nodded, hiding nothing. "Yes, and I will until you're completely safe." Amos set the spoon down, hands clasped in his lap. A moment of hesitation, then he said, "Grandpa, if I stayed here, would that be okay?" I didn't answer right away. I stood, added more logs to the fire, then turned to him with the same look Lila had given every child she treated in over 40 years as a nurse. "You stay here," I said slowly, firmly, each word sinking into the old wooden floor, "not because I allow it, but because this is your home, for as long as you want it to be." This time Amos didn't just smile. He cried, not loud, but the soft kind, the tears that fall when a child finally believes they're safe. I pulled the blanket closer around him and sat beside him without saying another word. In this house, explanations weren't needed, only letting him know this warmth was real, and no one had the right to take it from him. The fire crackled. Snow outside fell softly again, and inside the 120-year-old timber house, between hot soup and orange firelight, for the first time in years, a child learned what safety felt like. And I, Ronan Hale, knew that from this moment on, I wasn't just saving a neglected boy. I was saving the rest of his life. Inside the warm timber house against the Montpelier night, After Amos had fallen asleep on the small bed by the window, wrapped in the quilt Lila once stitched, I stepped onto the back porch with my old phone and a weight in my chest no fireplace could melt. Snow fell quietly, laying a calm white over the chaos Damien had carved into the boy's life. I opened my contacts, searching for the one name I had kept for years like a professional compass, May Whitfield. May had been my mentor when we surveyed Victorian structures across New England. She had eyes that could see through rotted wood, hollow concrete, and sometimes through the masks people wore. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Ronan, calling at this hour means you're not asking about fixing houses." Her voice was sharp and warm at once, the kind only people who spend their lives digging up truth seem to develop. I told her everything, from Amos sitting blue-lipped on the snow steps, to Damien's gaslighting, to the tense encounter with the police. When I reached the part about the boy being punished for burning the turkey skin, May went silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Ronan, where is Amos now?" "At my house, sleeping, warm by the fire, safe." "Good," she said, "because from this moment, you need to handle everything by the book. Family abuse in Vermont can't just be told. You must prove it. You need data, physical evidence." I leaned on the railing, wind threading through the porch beams. "Where do I start?" May's voice slowed, precise as if reading a technical blueprint. "First, photograph the injuries. Use natural light, include a scale reference, and take another set tomorrow morning when the bruises show color more clearly." A chill ran down my spine. "Second, record the outside temperature at the time you found him. If you didn't take a photo, use Weather Archive Montpellier. Download the record and save the PDF. CPS prefers documents with independent timestamps." She paused briefly, then continued. "Third, neighbor video. Houses along Maple Crest Lane sit close. Someone's porch cam has the footage. At least one camera captured him on the steps and the moments Damien shut the door." I nodded into the dark. "My neighbor, Mrs. Harriet Stillman, saw me carry him to the truck." "Good." "And fourth," May said, "Sienna's text." I stayed silent. "Ronan, you and I both know Sienna's trapped. Long-term gaslighting makes her fear Damien more than the truth. But her frantic, contradictory messages are unstructured evidence, walls beginning to show cracks." I opened our text thread. The lines she'd written now hurt more than Amos's bruises. "I'm fine. Don't come back. Damien is just trying to teach Amos to grow up. Dad, please don't make things worse." May sighed softly through the phone. "Exactly. Messages like that. CPS reads them and knows the pattern immediately. Dependent victim, controlling partner, neglected child." I asked, "Is that enough for CPS to step in?" "In Vermont," May replied, "only one factor is needed: risk of harm. Amos was left in under 10 degrees Fahrenheit for over 4 hours. That's imminent danger. CPS is obligated to interview." I looked through the window at Amos, sleeping in the warm glow. "When will they come?" "Ronan," May said, quiet but steel true. "Possibly tomorrow." And just as she predicted. 10 o'clock the next morning, with the sun still clinging to the bottom of the Montpelier Valley, a Vermont CPS vehicle stopped in front of my porch. A female worker stepped out, thick coat, notebook in hand, wearing the soft, sorrow-tinged smile of someone who witnesses fractured families for a living. I brought Amos into the living room, let him sit by the fire for warmth, and I stepped back. No coaching, no prompting. CPS had to hear from him. "Do you want to tell me about yesterday?" the worker asked gently. Amos looked at me first, his eyes still puffy from lack of sleep. I gave a small nod, just to say I'm here. And he began to talk, calmer than I expected, clearer than I imagined, and far more painful than anything I'd prepared for. When the interview ended, the worker closed her notebook, breathed deep, and said, "We'll open a Level 2 assessment. During the investigation, Amos will remain with you. This is a protective measure." After they left, my phone lit up again, A message from May. "How did it go?" I replied. "CPS is involved." She texted back one sentence, one I will never forget. "Abuse is like a rotted house. Pull up the right board and the whole truth comes loose." I looked over at Amos, already asleep on the chair from exhaustion, and I knew we had just pulled the first board. That afternoon, when the Montpelier sun was reduced to a thin strip above the tree line, police and CPS returned to Maple Crest Lane again, only this time not to question me. I parked 2 houses down from Sienna's place, kept Amos in the truck cabin with the doors locked, and leaned against the hood to watch. Not because I wanted to witness the collapse, but because I needed to know the boy would never be thrown back into danger again. When the patrol lights strobed on, Damien slammed the door open, face blazing red with rage, eyes of a man addicted to commanding others. "What are you doing here again? I told you. He kidnapped my son." One officer raised a hand. "Mr. Damien Lowe, we received a report from CPS, along with neighbor-provided video, documenting a 7-year-old child left outside in holiday weather." He snarled, "Who filmed it?" And as if to answer, Mrs. Harriet Stillman from across the street opened her door, holding her phone high. "I did. I saw everything. The boy sat out there for more than 4 hours. I even heard you yell, 'Let him chill.'" Each word fell like nails driven into old planks. Sienna stood behind Damien, eyes hollow. For the first time, I saw my daughter look like someone waking from a long drug sleep. CPS produced documents. "We need to speak with you privately, Sienna." Damien shoved in, gripping her elbow. "You're not saying anything to them." A CPS worker immediately stepped between them. "Mr. Lowe, step back." But Damien didn't. The louder he got, the more his real nature surfaced, the one he'd buried for years. And then the first blow landed straight into Sienna's spirit. The line that stripped his mask clean off. "You're as useless as your father." I saw Sienna freeze as if struck. From Magnolia, where Lila once held her little hand, to Montpelier, tonight, no one had ever said that to her. The CPS worker scribbled quickly. An officer turned to Sienna. "Do you feel safe living in this home?" Each white breath drifted through the cold. Sienna looked at Damien, looked at the ground, then looked at me, standing 2 houses away, my hand still on the truck door where Amos sat waiting. And for the first time, I saw something new. Fear mixed with recognition. Someone realizing the wooden walls around her were not a house, but a trap. CPS read the temporary order. "During the course of the investigation, Mr. Damien Lowe is prohibited from contacting Amos for 14 days. This order is effective immediately." Damien barked a laugh. "You have no authority." The officer cut him off. Firm, "We do." And then they placed the order in his hand. At that moment, Damien's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face drained. No one but me understood what was happening. This was the collapse he never saw coming. Because that morning, under CPS coordination, the bank had been alerted to an ongoing investigation. And when he tried to initiate the $150,000 loan for the wood furniture showroom he'd bragged about for 3 months, the bank immediately froze the file, labeling it "Fraud Risk Pending CPS Inquiry." Damien stared at the notification, eyes red like someone being dragged out of his own fantasy of power. He screamed, kicked the patio table leg, then spun toward Sienna, spitting, "You just ruined my future." Sienna burst into tears. No more defending him, no more covering for him, only truth, piece by piece, falling away like crumbled drywall after a wet winter. As CPS prepared to leave, the worker said, "The child will remain with Mr. Ronan until our investigation concludes. We will contact you within 48 hours. Damien shouted, "He's not family!" I stepped forward, standing tall, looking at him through the thin veil of blowing snow. "I'm his grandfather, and unlike you, I understand what it means to protect a child." Police held Damien back when he lurched toward me. Sienna stood trembling, but for the first time in years, She didn't follow him, didn't touch him, didn't apologize for him. She just stared at the space between us, as if seeing for the first time the life she'd been missing far too long. And in that moment, I knew. Maple Crest had just lost a rotted beam, and a woman had finally seen light through the cracks of the cage she'd lived in for years. That night, snow fell again over the Maple Ridge line as if New England wanted to bury every trace of the long, exhausting day. I was bracing a sagging beam on the porch roof when I heard tires crunch to a sudden stop on the gravel drive. A car door opened, and Sienna, my daughter, stepped out. No warm coat, hair tangled, eyes red, like someone who had run from something darker than the forest night. She stood under the porch light, looked at me for barely a second before she broke down crying. I hurried over and opened the door. She almost collapsed into my chest. "Dad," her voice cracked. I don't know. How long I've been blind." I didn't pat her back like she was a child. I let her lean on me so she could feel this wasn't a place for shame. This was home. When she calmed, I said only one sentence, slow and clear. "You just need to do one thing, stand on your son's side." Sienna nodded, but the tears kept coming. "You think I didn't know?" she said, like confessing. I knew something was wrong, but he kept telling me I imagined it, that I was making everything worse, that I was useless. I brought her inside, set a thick blanket over her shoulders. The fire was burning bright, and Amos slept in the small room by the kitchen, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Sienna looked at her son's door, and for the first time I saw her eyes shine not with fear, but with shame toward herself. "Dad," she exhaled, "I thought I loved him. I thought he needed me. But I checked my accounts tonight, and I realized he needed me in another way." She pulled a wrinkled stack of papers from her coat pocket. Bank statements, credit cards, bills, red numbers everywhere like spreading blood. $48,000. She said it softly, like afraid of waking the whole world. "I'm $48,000 in debt, Dad. All because he made me co-sign everything. I didn't even know what I was signing. He told me I was stupid if I didn't." I squeezed her shoulder lightly, not angry, just sad. Sienna inhaled shakily, eyes swollen. "And partly because I had one divorce already, Dad, you know that. I was terrified of failing again. Terrified people would say I couldn't keep a family. I kept enduring so I could prove I could make it work. So no one would say I was the woman who left 2 husbands." Her voice broke into fragments. I held on because I was afraid of being alone again, afraid of the pity in people's eyes. I thought if I just sacrificed a little more, things would get better. But I was wrong. "Honey," I said, "a good man never makes the one he loves carry his responsibilities for him." Sienna sat in Lila's old wooden chair. She wiped her face, sighing as if letting go of 3 years of weight. I poured her a cup of hot tea. When her hand touched the mug, I could tell her shaking wasn't from cold, but from relief. She had finally chosen the right side. "Dad," she whispered, "I want out, but I don't know where to start." I nodded. This was the first time she had asked for help. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I know someone," I said, reaching for my phone, scrolling to the name I'd kept since the day Lila died. Elaine Porter, attorney at law, Family and Domestic Violence Unit. "Tomorrow," I told her, "I'll take you to see Elaine. You need a safe exit plan, not a midnight escape." Sienna looked at me, her eyes wet, but shining with something I hadn't seen in years. The look of a mother stepping back into her rightful role. "Dad," she murmured, "can I stay here tonight?" I smiled. "This has always been your home." She leaned on my shoulder. Outside, snow kept falling, but in this 120-year-old warm house, what I felt was not Vermont's cold, but something I'd waited years for, a family beginning to stitch itself back together, bit by bit. The next morning, as pale light seeped through the curtains and the steam from hot tea curled in the old kitchen air, I drove Sienna to the office of Elaine Porter, a small red brick building beside the county courthouse, with a glass door marked Family and Domestic Violence Unit. Elaine greeted us with an expression both gentle and sharp, the kind worn by people who've seen too much pain but still insist on pulling others out of it. Sienna sat across her desk, hands clenched together, but voice steadier now. Elaine opened a navy blue folder and slid a neatly organized list toward her. Divorce petition, domestic abuse affidavit, temporary custody request, event report, and attached evidence. Sienna swallowed, asking, "So, what do I need to prepare first?" Elaine adjusted her glasses, voice soft yet cutting. "Only 3 things. The truth, the paperwork, and the resolve to leave him. I'll handle the rest." And Sienna nodded, just a small nod, but strong enough for me to know she had taken the first step into a new life. That night, snow fell again over the Maple Ridge line as if New England wanted to bury every trace of the long, exhausting day. I was bracing a sagging beam on the porch roof when I heard tires crunch to a sudden stop on the gravel drive. A car door opened, and Sienna, my daughter, stepped out. No warm coat, hair tangled, eyes red like someone who had run from something darker than the forest night. She stood under the porch light, looked at me for barely a second before she broke down crying. I hurried over and opened the door. She almost collapsed into my chest. "Dad?" Her voice cracked. I don't know how long I've been blind." I didn't pat her back like she was a child. I let her lean on me so she could feel this wasn't a place for shame. This was home. When she calmed, I said only one sentence, slow and clear. "You just need to do one thing. Stand on your son's side." Sienna nodded, but the tears kept coming. "You think I didn't know?" she said, like confessing. I knew something was wrong, but he kept telling me I imagined it, that I was making everything worse, that I was useless. I brought her inside, set a thick blanket over her shoulders. The fire was burning bright, and Amos slept in the small room by the kitchen, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Sienna looked at her son's door, and for the first time I saw her eyes shine, not with fear, but with shame toward herself. "Dad," she exhaled, "I thought I loved him. I thought he needed me. But I checked my accounts tonight, and I realized he needed me in another way." She pulled a wrinkled stack of papers from her coat pocket. Bank statements, credit cards, bills, red numbers everywhere like spreading blood. $48,000. She said it softly, like afraid of waking the whole world. "I'm $48,000 in debt, Dad. All because he made me co-sign everything. I didn't even know what I was signing. He told me I was stupid if I didn't." I squeezed her shoulder lightly. Not angry, just sad. Sienna inhaled shakily, eyes swollen. "And partly because I had one divorce already, Dad. You know that. I was terrified of failing again. Terrified people would say I couldn't keep a family. I kept enduring so I could prove I could make it work. So no one would say I was the woman who left 2 husbands." Her voice broke into fragments. "I held on because I was afraid of being alone again, afraid of the pity in people's eyes. I thought if I just sacrificed a little more, things would get better. But I was wrong." "Honey," I said, "a good man never makes the one he loves carry his responsibilities for him." Sienna sat in Lila's old wooden chair. She wiped her face, sighing as if letting go of 3 years of weight. I poured her a cup of hot tea. When her hand touched the mug, I could tell her shaking wasn't from cold, but from relief. She had finally chosen the right side. "Dad," she whispered, "I want out, but I don't know where to start." I nodded. This was the first time she had asked for help. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I know someone," I said, reaching for my phone, scrolling to the name I'd kept since the day Lila died. "Elaine Porter, attorney at law, Family and Domestic Violence Unit. Tomorrow, I told her, I'll take you to see Elaine. You need a safe exit plan, not a midnight escape. Sienna looked at me, her eyes wet, but shining with something I hadn't seen in years. The look of a mother stepping back into her rightful role. Dad, she murmured, can I stay here tonight? I smiled. This has always been your home. She leaned on my shoulder. Outside, snow kept falling. But in this 120-year-old warm house, what I felt was not Vermont's cold, but something I'd waited years for. A family beginning to stitch itself back together, bit by bit. The next morning, as pale light seeped through the curtains and the steam from hot tea curled in the old kitchen air, I drove Sienna to the office of Elaine Porter, a small red brick building beside the county courthouse, with a glass door marked Family and Domestic Violence Unit. Elaine greeted us with an expression both gentle and sharp, the kind worn by people who've seen too much pain, but still insist on pulling others out of it. Sienna sat across her desk, hands clenched together, but voice steadier now. Elaine opened a navy blue folder and slid a neatly organized list toward her. Divorce petition, domestic abuse affidavit, temporary custody request, event report, and attached evidence. Sienna swallowed, asking, So, what do I need to prepare first? Elaine adjusted her glasses, voice soft yet cutting. Only 3 things. The truth, the paperwork, and the resolve to leave him. I'll handle the rest. And Sienna nodded, just a small nod, but strong enough for me to know she had taken the first step into a new life. Vermont Family Court, a few weeks later, was so cold the breath turned to smoke, old wooden halls, yellow lights, and nearly 60 people packed into the courtroom. Neighbors from Maple Crest Lane, a few guests who'd been present on Thanksgiving night, CPS workers, local officers, and onlookers drawn in because the video had quietly spread through the community. I walked in with Amos and Sienna. The boy's hand clutched mine, cold but no longer shaking, like the night he sat on the snow step. When Damien appeared a few minutes later, expensive coat, straightened tie, wearing the mask of a model man, several neighbors whispered, "That's him, the one who left the kid in the snow." He heard it. His face twitched. Judge Meredith Collins, silver hair, small frame, voice sharp as a steel saw blade, opened the session. Case number 47, FC 213, hearing on emergency custody and child safety. CPS brought up the screen. The video played, Amos sitting on the snowy step, thin hoodie, purple lips, trembling hands, snow falling thick as if to bury him. Inside, laughter, cutlery, toast. An elderly neighbor muttered, "Good Lord, 7 years old?" A woman covered her mouth, crying right where she stood. Damien shot up. "That's taken out of context. Just discipline." But his voice fell flat against a wave of outrage. The judge raised her hand. Her tone was so cold, the room froze instantly. "Mr. Lowe, sit down. Discipline does not include freezing a child outside in Vermont in November. CPS listed neglect, coercive control, intimidation. Each count sounded like a hammer strike on the old floorboards. Damien's attorney stammered objections, but Sienna stood, no longer afraid, her voice shaky but clear. "Amos is only 7, and he spent a year living in fear. That is enough." The courtroom fell silent at those words, like hearing a chain snap. The judge tapped the gavel. After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and CPS reports, the court rules: 1. Mr. Damien Lowe is prohibited from contacting the child for 1 year. 2. Sole custody is granted to Ms. Sienna Hale. 3. Mr. Lowe must complete a 26-week DV intervention program. 4. A temporary protective order for Mr. Ronan Hale is approved. 5. An emergency divorce petition is accepted and will receive priority scheduling. At that moment, the neighbors exhaled, not in celebration, but in confirmation. He got what he deserved. Damien lunged up, shouting, "This isn't over, old man!" but courthouse deputies were already flanking him, hands hovering over cuffs. I looked him dead in the eyes, my voice low and cold as the January wind off Lake Champlain. It ended the moment you left a child out in the snow, and the entire town saw it. He was led out under the weight of dozens of staring eyes, a public humiliation he couldn't dodge for even a second. When the courtroom door slammed shut behind him, the old wooden room felt suddenly warmer. Amos hugged me. Sienna stood beside us, eyes red but shining for the first time in a year. And on that skin-cutting Vermont morning, the whole community watched the mask Damien had worn for a year shatter like rooftop ice at the tail end of winter. And justice, finally, chose the child. The following autumn, golden leaves covered the road leading to Old Mill Road, Vermont's sunlight pouring down like diluted honey, and the lives of the three of us quietly slipped into a completely different chapter. Amos, the boy who once sat shivering on a snow step in a thin hoodie, now held in his hands an envelope embossed with the seal of the Vermont Youth Resilience Fund, a full scholarship for children who have overcome adversity. I stood behind him as he opened it, watching his small shoulders tremble, but this time not from cold, from the pride of a child who finally knows he matters. After finalizing the divorce, Sienna moved into a small house 5 minutes' drive from mine. Pale yellow porch, flower beds at the front planted by Amos himself. The two of them lived lighter, as if someone had lifted a brick straight off their hearts after a year of severing every tie with Damien. No contact, no trace of him left. I kept doing my work, a man who reads a building's life through old timbers and hairline cracks. And one afternoon, when the last winter light swept through my 120-year-old workshop, I sat alone with the old clock Lila had loved most. I opened the back panel and carved a line I knew she would approve of. Time heals only when truth enters the room. Time heals only when truth enters, just as it did in our home, late but exactly on time. That Thanksgiving, we didn't set out a grand feast. No turkey, no fancy wine, just a pot of hot soup, an apple pie following Lila's recipe, and 3 people sitting around the old wooden table, firelight warming faces I once thought I would never see at peace again. When the meal neared its end, Amos set down his spoon, turned to me, his brown eyes reflecting the fire. You taking me home that day saved all 3 of us. The house fell quiet for a moment, a kind of silence beautiful enough to keep. I rested my hand on his shoulder, glanced out the window where the season's first snow had begun to fall lightly, and understood that sometimes a family doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs truth, courage, and one moment where someone says, "This child goes with me," and that is how a new family begins. Out. Some stories don't end with a scream, but with the exhale of those who finally step out of the dark. If you've stayed with me to the very end, thank you, truly. If you want to continue walking with me through stories of justice, courage, and kinship, stories told with the quiet but relentless resolve of ordinary people, I'd be grateful if you subscribed. It's how we find our way back to each other in the journeys ahead. Thank you, from the heart. May you always have warm light in your own home.